We are now recording. Take it away, guys.
All right, good morning. I'm Leianne Heppner from the Summit County Historical Society, and it's hard to believe that a year and a half ago, a group of us got together at Westlake, and Greg Palumbo started telling some stories of disasters, which prompted us to think that probably all of you could have a refresher, or maybe you need some knowledge about how to conduct and put together a disaster plan. And that's when I decided to rope together my friend Mary Plazo from the Akron-Summit County Public Library.
Hi, so I'm the manager of special collections at Akron Library. I worked with Leianne a long time, but I'm proud to be the steward of the Summit County Historical Society's photograph and document collections. So we both have a very invested interest in keeping our collections safe, and we've both had experiences, and I'm just really thankful that Leianne brought me on to join you all here today. So thanks. And of course, we have the great Greg Palumbo with us.
I don't know about the great, but hello, everyone. So throughout this talk today, I'll be telling stories about disasters I've been part of. It'll sound like maybe I am creating these disasters. I swear everything was not my fault. I just was there to clean things up. But yeah, when we started talking about this a little over a year ago, it was not too in the distant past that the Cathedral of Notre Dame had burned, and it was forefront in my mind of this is a time when we need to be telling people you got to get your disaster planning in order. That this is something that is really important. So I'm glad that we're able to have this now, after this year of spending a lot of time with our collections and not so much with our visitors. Everybody hopefully is pretty in tune with what we have going on in our sites, and now is a great time to put together your disaster plan. Just a little bit of background on me. I'm the executive director of the Lakewood Historical Society. Before that, I had a lot of, not a lot, but a few jobs. Ones that I'll be touching on today, I was the exhibits manager for the Seminole Tribe of Florida's Atatiki Museum in Central South Florida. And I was also the head preparator at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for a few years as well. So that's a little me in a nutshell.
But Greg, you've got to tell your story, about water.
So when I was in Florida working with the Seminole Tribe, I was there for 5 years, almost to the day. And every year was, oh my gosh, are we going to get a hurricane? Let's do hurricane preparedness. So we did training on water salvage. We did training on wind. We did training on all these things. And then we had a security director that was was coming from the police department and said, well, if you're doing all that training, we also need to do all of this security training. So we trained, and never used it. I came back to Ohio thinking I'm in this nice, safe place now. I don't have to worry about hurricanes anymore. And within the first couple of months, the basement at the oldest stone house flooded, and it flooded more than it ever had. And I had to dry out everything that was on the bottom shelves. So it was, I immediately started using that hurricane preparedness when I got back to Cleveland. So that's where I'm coming from.
So we're going to talk about what the D plan is. So I have been with special collections for a very long time, but I did not become manager until 2017, and I was very fortunate that my predecessor, Judy James, who some of you may know, she was very invested. One of her goals while she was manager was to really invest in time and planning and research into a disaster plan, because our library system really didn't have anything documented in writing in order to plan for recovery of disasters. So she did a lot of thorough research, and she is the one who actually found this tool, the D plan. It's very easy and it's totally free, and it includes so many aspects. It includes every single aspect you could think of or need to think about. It's troubleshooting, it's planning, it provides forms, it provides everything you need to think about any particular situation or organization that you might represent. So that's why we're gonna mostly talk about, I'm gonna mostly present about the D plan today, just because I think it's such an easy tool. So as you'll see here, it's free. Again, it's an online tool. It's very simple. You can create it to be, specific to your organization. It helps you think about all different kinds of disasters, whether it's floods or earthquakes or tornadoes. And I know that Greg has even more to share about these kinds of things too.
Yeah, so speaking about that oldest stone house disaster we had, so you can see here, we've since moved from this location, but this is what our library and archive used to look like. May look familiar to a lot of people, very packed, very close quarters. And you can see that the bottom of the shelving is only about 4 inches off the floor. So we had in the oldest stone house we have as a museum. The house was built in the 1830s, and in the 70s it was lifted to put in this basement, and it's where our offices, library and archives were for many years. So every once in a while since the 90s, I'm guessing since something changed in the sewers, the basement sits just below the bottom of the sewer level. So if the sewer's backed up enough, the water would come up through the drains in the basement. So we had 5 drains that we had to deal with, 4 of which would back up, 1 of which being the toilet. That was rough. So we would keep a bag of salt in the basement that you would shove into the toilet so that the water would be trapped in the toilet. You want to use salt because if the bag breaks, the salt will dissolve in the water. If you use sand or rocks or anything else, it will, you have to get that out of the toilet then. So if you do have to do that and you do have to block up a drain, salt's the way to do it. So a bag of salt. So we had a bag of salt that sat in the bathroom all the time, and we would put it in the toilet when we knew we were going to get a big rain. And then the other sewer drains, which were sandbagged, but the sandbags, it would leak around the sandbags, and the other one they had capped and made it a couple feet taller so that it drained back into our wash tubs, but it failed. We had a backflow valve. If it would fail, if the rain was fast enough, it would come right through. So we would get this glazing of water in the basement for a couple of decades. It's a city-owned building. We tried to get them to fix it. They tried little patches and Band-Aids here and there all the time, and it just never got fixed. My first big event when I was working for the for the Lakewood was a baseball game in June. We spent the entire day out there doing vintage baseball, and I was finally done for the day, and the rain started coming in and it chased everybody off, and I was like, all right, we're done. And I start putting things away, the rain starts, and then the basement floods that 4 inches that had flooded. And I have a couple of volunteers, which volunteers are great, and we were bailing water out the front door, getting garbage cans and bailing water out the front door. That flood stopped and went back down. It receded. And then after it recedes, we have to dry the place out so that we don't have higher humidity and it's not affecting the collections and everything in the house. Luckily, the way that those two are separated, the air for the air handling system comes from outside and gets blown upstairs. And the upstairs is completely separated from the downstairs, and there's a separate entrance. So we're able to pretty much isolate the upstairs, and we haven't, luckily, knock on wood, haven't had any problems with that upstairs with the museum proper. The bigger problem is in this basement. So the walls, you can see here in the middle of the screen, you'll see walls where they meet the floor, there's a wood baseboard and it's drywall. That would get soaked and start wicking up water. So we'd have to dry it out and get everything dried out and then continue drying it for another week after that to try and get all of that moisture out of the walls. We hit a problem the next year where it flooded so much that it went above our 4-inch blocking that we had put underneath everything and was up to 6 inches. We measured about 6 inches of water in the basement, which you can see in that bottom picture. That meant a lot of things that were on those bottom shelves got soaked. That included a lot of scrapbooks, which is where you see all these photographs and items that are look like photographs are coming out of scrapbooks that had then fallen apart. We had a lot of training manuals, databases, older databases, things that hadn't been dealt with and we felt were on the lower end of, if they did get water, it wouldn't be a horrible tragedy, but it's not something we necessarily wanted. After that, I'll just interject this. After that, we decided we were going, anything that goes on the bottom shelves had to be put in a plastic tub. You can see we don't have a lot of room, so we didn't really have the option to take it somewhere else and leave those bottom shelves empty. So we ended up putting everything into plastic tubs after that. It was difficult, and it went quickly. We came in the next morning and it was soaked. After that, things are in plastic tubs and we're good. We had another flood later on that, in just about 4 years ago, we had a flood that soaked the walls and then the humidity didn't go down and the walls stayed soaked for a while. Because the humidity in the environment didn't go down, so we couldn't just get the humidity out of the building, and it was a real problem. And we had a mold explosion in our kitchen area behind wallpaper. Mold loves wallpaper. If you have wallpaper anywhere that gets damaged, gets water, make sure that you're focusing on drying that wallpaper out, because the glue promotes mold growth. Found that out. But we were all having respiratory issues, particularly me, because I was down there all the time. So that had a whole new crisis where we had to remove ourselves from that area and get out. So we ended up moving all of this to temporary space. And then eventually we were able to move into that, facilitated that sped up the process for us getting a new property and moving above ground finally. So just this week, I could say that the basement is finally back to where we want it. We had a couple of things happen over the last 2 years. It's taken 2 years. We had the flooding. The city, we got out. That took some time. Then the city came in 2 years ago, cut out 2 feet of drywall all the way around the basement and left it that way for a year and a half while we waited for the sewer line down the street to have repairs and be lowered, which was very interesting. But it seems to have fixed the problem. Everybody cross your fingers. It seems to have fixed the problem. So we waited this year to make sure that we weren't going to have any more issues. We haven't had flooding since. So they came back in and put in new drywall over the last month, and we're back to having a basement again. But I am not going to be putting any collections in it for at least another year till we make sure we don't have any more flooding. So cross your fingers and hope that we're able to do that. So I will move. That was a long story, but it kind of sets up where I'm coming from and where we're going to be talking about in the disaster plan. It hits on a lot of things, knowing how to triage your items, knowing what items to save, what to not save, prepping for disaster. And then once the disaster happens, finding space to deal with it and dealing with it properly. So I believe I kick it over to Mary, who will talk more about D-Plan.
Yeah, so we're gonna go through all those things here with everyone, and it's great to have Greg, here talking about real life experiences and on hands, dealing with all these issues that can be really overwhelming. And this is again why I kind of want to promote the D plan, because when you're overwhelmed, in a situation, this is a really nice way. It's a very simple tool that you can just automatically refer to, because it's the kind of tool that you can easily type in all the information you need. You can type in everything you need to know about your institution and contact information, and it could be all right there for you, so that you don't have to think about it or worry about it, and you can just go right to it when a situation happens. So I think that what's nice about it is that it's useful for larger institutions like mine, like the Akron Public Library, but it's also useful for smaller historical societies, and Leianne can say something about that too.
Well, I just wanted to emphasize that sometimes people see something and like Mary said, it's overwhelming and you think it's not for me. I'm not a big organization. So here are two of the smaller organizations, one in Region 3 and one in Region 4. This D plan can be specialized just for them. What does their space look like and what do they need? So I just want to encourage you to take the time, investigate, be curious, and learn more about it and not be intimidated.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good way to look at it, Leianne. So another reason to look at the D plan is because the integrity of the institutions and organizations that created this plan. So the first one is the Northeast Document Conservation Center. They were founded in 1973 and actually were established as one of the very first conservation laboratories in the United States that preserves photographs and papers. So they're a very good institution to look forward to as far as integrity of an organization. And the next one is the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. They're the oldest library commission organization that promotes ideas and programs and initiatives for both libraries and residents as well. So what's nice about the D plan, as we were saying before, is that you can create different levels for yourself. So for example, an organization like us at the Akron Public Library, we have 18 branches. We have a very in-depth plan of 170 pages that includes a lot of our, the different complex levels of staff, facilities, IT, all the supervisory staff, administration. But what's nice about the D plan is that you can create what they call a light plan for smaller organizations. And you can just plug in, the basic things that you need, if you have a small staff, a couple volunteers you count on, board members, board chairs, you can completely detail it to what your specific vulnerabilities are and to the specific staff in your agency. So the first thing you want to do that they say that you want to do is you want to form your team. So think about who's going to be on your team. So this would be people that you can use to delegate, who can walk around the building and look at things for me, who could find me a floor plan, you can delegate and plan a team and have people help you put together what you're going to need for this disaster plan. And then after you do that, you're going to want to prepare a staff list of all the important people that you want on your team. And what's nice is you can simply input all this information. You can have their contact information there, and you can group people in different ways. You can have a group of your team and your staff and recovery team. So for Akron Public Library, since we're a larger system, we have to include all these people in our disaster planning team. Like I said before, facilities, security, IT, these are all people we need to think about when we're thinking about our disaster plan. But Leianne, with institutions like historical societies, with Leianne and Greg and what many of you represent, it would be a different kind of list. So I think Leianne could say something about that. So.
Well, I know Greg and I have issues with this. And most importantly, you want to make sure if you're an all volunteer organization, somebody has the key and the code. And I know Greg's going to talk about that, but you want to think about those individuals that might be handy, an individual that has authority like your board chair, and potentially your curatorial committee should be on there. So if there is an emergency, you have all of their names and numbers that you can contact them at home, especially if it's in the middle of the night. Greg, what did you want to add?
Yeah, I don't live in my community. I'm a little bit away, so if there's any kind of an emergency, it's going to take me at least a half hour to get into the building. So I have to have a list of people that I know can have a key, that I can trust with the code, and are willing to be called at 3 a.m. So, it takes a special volunteer or a staff person that's willing to be called at 3 a.m. to go and see, is the building on fire? If it is, what do we need to be doing? So there's those kind of issues. Security issues are also come up a lot. You want to be cognizant of, you don't want to be putting your volunteers in jeopardy. So you also need to have a good relationship with your police department so that they can come out and check to make sure all of the windows are intact, or things like that.
So that comes to, you all know you all know your organizations, you all probably know the specific vulnerabilities. So these are the things that you need to think about. What does your team need to plan for? What kind of unexpected incidents do you know that you need to plan for? And these are photos that we're highlighting from the Summit County Historical Society's collection. We have a website called summitmemory.org, but these are great examples, historic examples of disasters you might want to think about, or as I say, what you might need to prepare for. So these are the kinds of things that your teams will think about. So I think Greg and Leianne have something to add to this too.
Well, Greg, I forgot to add that photograph for that wonderful donation that you received. If you want to tell them about that first.
So I know there are some of my past curators are on this call, so they've dealt with this situation. We had a donor who gave us a footlocker to display in a World War II exhibit. That footlocker came with all of its contents. He comes in, he plops it down, he says, "Here you go." He leaves, and as we're going through the items, find out that there's silver nitrate film in this footlocker. So that anybody that knows about that knows that it can spontaneously combust. So that was where we were like, oh, what do we do with this? And we immediately took it and isolated it in glass jars, and then got a hold of him, which was no easy task. He's an engineer of trains. So calling him was always an issue because he was in and out of cell phone range as he was going on his train route. So it took a little bit of time, but we had to isolate that silver nitrate from the collection and then get his permission to dispose of it because it was a pretty big hazard. Many things can be found in collections that were at one time stable and a good idea, and are no longer stable and no longer a good idea. Things like formaldehyde come to mind with that, and many others. You want anything that has nitroglycerin in it that can be separated out is a problem. So,
Well,
Leianne, did you have anything else?
Yeah, so the photograph you see with the mess that looks like a pharmacy actually is at a college where a shelf broke. And so these chemicals then went into the air. So anyone that might be working in an atmosphere where you're sharing an environment, you actually also have to think about the other people in that environment and the hazards that they may pose to you and your organization and your artifacts. The one on the right shows, unfortunately, an accident, and this accident caused something to be exposed into the air. But sometimes there can be things happening around you. And Mary wanted to share what was going on when Akron invested in ending its combined sewer overflow issue.
Well, I had a lot of issues with, we're downtown, so we're right near a lot of the activity that's been going on for building these new sewer overflows. And so we've had multiple incidents with burst water mains, but a lot of times the pressure and power of this water also damage surrounding areas, like busting glass on a building across the street from us. So you can never imagine the reality that a disaster can bring when you're trying to deal with something that happens. So, and this is mostly what I've dealt with, as Leianne said, is with our building, especially if you have a new building or if you have an old building that added some new things. It doesn't really seem to matter how new you might think your building is. There's always issues with, we've had a lot of issues with our HVAC system and old pipes and new pipes and trying to keep up with replacing things as they break down. If you've got a lot of that, it can cause a lot of trouble. These are pictures from my special collections area workroom that we dealt with during this, of course, happened. It seems like a lot of the disasters that happen here happen when we're closed and nobody's in the building, or there's maybe one security guard if we're lucky. This happened during our COVID closure, and I was able to come in. Our facilities people let me come in, and this we had a burst water pump right above our area, and it also, the electrical went out, so I had to go in with flashlights and do the cleanup here, and that's mostly what I've dealt with. But I know that Greg has had issues with dealing with things like this too.
Yeah, so I was with the Seminole tribe in Florida, and this you'll see here on the left-hand side, this is our canoe that is one of the oldest artifacts that the tribe has, and it's also one of the longest. It's about almost 30 feet, 20, 25, 30 feet. It is not in great condition, as you can see. It came from the bottom of a swamp. So when it was excavated, it was taken out, and you can see on the right-hand side, there had been some strapping that was used to hold it together. It had a lot of additions and things just to hold it together, and eventually it sank, and they just left it. So then when they pulled it out to bring it to the museum, they dried it out, but it's so embedded, the wood fibers are so embedded with issues that mold was in it. The only way to stop that mold from progressing is to keep the humidity and conditions consistent. You can see here the green that you see is paint. The white that you see is mold. So we had a power outage. This is in South Florida. This is actually in Hollywood, Florida, at one of our satellite institutions. The power went out in a building where we didn't control our own HVAC system, and we didn't control our own electricity. So they were doing some construction, and the power went out, and they couldn't get it back on, and they couldn't get it back on quickly. And the temperature kept rising and the humidity kept rising. As that happened, the mold started to spore and grow. And eventually the canoe became fuzzy. It was a big fuzzy canoe. There was nothing we could do until we could get the humidity back down. So we began isolating the canoe and going through our disaster plan. What do we do? How are we going to do this? So the first thing was to isolate it from the rest of the collection. Luckily, we were in transition in that gallery, so we had a little bit extra time. But in the tops of these photos, you can see there right above it is a very large mural. That mural was in its own disaster. And you can see on the left-hand picture, there's a little bit of fire damage. That was in a building that caught fire, and that mural was saved, salvaged, and cleaned. And it is enormous. The canoe sat right underneath it, and we had to isolate that canoe from the collection. So we wrapped it in shrink wrap so that we would cover any of the gaps that were in the actual casework. I created these stanchions at the top with the plywood that you can see to hold up the plastic they were putting on. And then we got this heavy, thick plastic that we wrapped the entire thing in, and then shrink wrap that around to create a seal and try and isolate that canoe best we could. We had a company called Artex come in. They created a crate for the canoe, which part of that was building the base of that crate to where it would then serve as the base for the canoe when it was on display forever. So we knew that we had this very fragile piece that was getting more fragile by the moment due to the mold and what was going to need to be done for the mold to stop. So they built a base. We moved the canoe onto that base, crated it, and took it away. I don't have any pictures of that crate, but it was amazing. The crate came apart in sections. As we were looking at the way this crate was constructed, we started thinking about, what we could do. What was the treatment plan for this canoe? The best thing we could have done is probably freeze it, kill everything in it, and then clean it. But we tried to find a freezer that could fit a 30-foot canoe. It was not feasible. There were plans at the time to build one somewhere in Florida, but that hadn't happened yet. There was the idea of getting a refrigerator truck and doing a refrigerated semi truck. The problem is they don't get cold enough. To kill things like mold and bugs, you need to get it as cold as ice cream. So it needs to go below the, it needs to get below the temperature of a regular commercial freezer. So you were looking at something like an ice cream freezer, which can get to those extremely cold temperatures and maintain it. So it has to be maintained over a long period of time, a week to a month of freezing this item to make sure that everything is dead. So we looked into, can we construct something? And that's part of what my process was with it, was look into constructing a cooler that we could make modular walls that would be insulated enough to maintain the cold, hook up an ice cream freezer to it, and then freeze this entire thing. None of that was possible. We ended up taking this from our satellite location and bringing it to our lab. We had a sizable lab at the laboratory space at the museum, which we were lucky to have. If you can ever work for an organization like the Seminole Tribe that has a casino attached to it, you get some nice facilities. So we had a nice lab, but my office was in there, as well as my assistant. An archaeologist's office was in there, and our conservator. To work on this, that's Corey Smith on the left-hand side there. She was our conservator. She used a technique much like this one that she's using on the moccasin with the cotton swab, and removed every bit of that mold inch by inch over the entire canoe. I think the next slide might show that laboratory.
It doesn't, Greg. I'm sorry. I had problems with that photograph on my computer.
Oh, no problem. So the lab, we got kicked out for about 2 weeks and had to find new offices for everybody for a couple of weeks, as she was in a hazmat suit removing that mold inch by inch over the entire canoe. So that was a disaster that happened with one artifact. Everything else in the gallery was okay. The humidity didn't affect it. Once everything got kicked back on, the humidity went back to normal. We were able to control it. We filled the gallery and had an exhibit. But that canoe was a disaster on a smaller scale, where it was just that one item, and we had to deal with that. And we were able to work our process of isolation and then relocation and then cleaning. So that was what that project was about.
And one of the other things we wanted to remind you is, when you're thinking of doing new construction or restoration or renovation, you've got to make sure that the people working with you are aware of your facility and think about things that could happen. The Historical Society had an asbestos abatement, so then we had to work through that. We've also had plaster repair and issues of the dust getting into other parts of the building. So you need to be aware of these risks. You also need to take some time and look at your structure, notice where you might have water damage, insect damage, and definitely keep an eye on your foundation, or you're going to have some water damage like Greg did. The other thing is, you want to devise some procedures. And we like to joke around when we have our annual meeting. We all have a happy hour after that first day. And so I thought that was appropriate. The best opening procedure I could find was for a bar. So don't necessarily use this procedure to copy it, but I thought they did a nice job of providing a checklist. So when a disaster happens, you have checklists that you can use. If you're opening the facility to the public and parts of it have issues, you've got a checklist to know what's available, where it's safe. You also have a checklist of when you're leaving, especially if you're going to be leaving for an extended period of time. And this is even without a disaster, is to make sure that there's a procedure for notification, knowing about your heating and cooling, appliances, lighting, and security. So we're going to get into a little bit more of these as we go on, because Mary's going to talk about how you get out of the building.
Yeah, so along with opening and closing, obviously a larger library here, like we're at Main Library and Special Collections, we've absolutely got to have evacuation plans and maps, everywhere, on site for the public as well as for staff. And we need to go over these and make sure that people can see where they need to go, because there are multiple exits, and we need people to be safe. But evacuation is also important for your for your smaller properties. You're still going to need these kind of plans to let people know where your exits are at, or when certain things happen, where can they go. So, and I also think when you're thinking about all these things, before you're running out of the building, because we're all history nerds, we're not thinking about leaving. We're thinking about what the heck are we going to save from the, we can't save everything, but what can I carry? What can two people carry? But, so this is where we talked about, Greg mentioned before, like you got to think about what is it that you're going to salvage? You need to create that priority list. So for example, here at Main Library at Akron, one of our top priorities is the Summit County Historical Society's collection. That is definitely on our list. They're rare materials, they're replaceable, so that is definitely on our salvage list. And I know that Greg probably has some more thoughts about this too.
Yeah, so we have a lot of bullet points here, and as you go through your D plan and you're looking through your collection, you think, oh, there's so much of this, plus there's all of these administrative issues. Don't think of it. There's a question in the chat from Andy that says, what do you think the biggest impediment of adopting D Plan Light is? I don't think that there is an impediment. It's a process of working through it, and you put in as much or as little as you can. But part of it is doing an assessment of your collections and of your assets, and figuring out what you're going to keep, what you're not. But if you set up processes all along, then you can cut those down. You can cut that list down substantially. A big part of that is your data backup. So you're looking at here, it says director's laptop, or computer, your board of trustee minutes, data backup, Vault's hard drive. The more you can take that and back it up on a regular basis, the less risk you have, and then take that back up and get it off site. And that's an important part. Disasters, regional disasters, something like tornadoes or, major flooding could affect more than just your institution, but more what we get in this area are these smaller disasters. So you're looking at, a fire in your building or a flood in your building. If you have that data off site, there's a good chance that it survives and you can get right back to working. I mean, imagine if your records database for your collection was just gone tomorrow, and all of your paper backups are in that same building, so they're gone tomorrow. You don't even know where to start when you start going back to try and salvage that collection, saying, all right, we need to make sure we find all of these bits and pieces off the list. You don't even have a list to start from. So having that backup off-site is very important. And if you have that in your regular, day-to-day operations, that takes care of a lot of those bullets all at once. One thing I was thinking about with this as well, the more you can digitize, the better. So when you do have, your paper files of your database, and you're backing up, past perfect, and you're putting it on a hard drive, having scans of your card files wouldn't be a terrible thing to have also. Just to have in a separate file, so that if that file gets corrupted and you can't get back into past perfect, or it takes a while for you to get computers up and running with Past Perfect and have Past Perfect come in and make sure all of your files go back in, you would at least have those card files that you could go to in a digital format as well. And that could be just as simple as, throwing them on a scanner and having them scan. And that's a great thing for high school interns, for volunteers. They can just sit there and scan all day and get all that digitized into a file. So that's my little take on that. We're going to talk a little bit about technology in a little bit too. I probably covered most of it there though.
Well, and you need to become familiar with your insurance policy. Sometimes the curator may not be the person that is establishing the insurance policy, but the collections people need to know what the insurance policy says. You need to make sure that everything is covered. I know here at the Historical Society, we had added a reproduction gazebo for something that had been here at the turn of the century. And the next year we went to review our insurance, we did not have it covered. So if it would have been hit by lightning or something like that, it wouldn't have been covered by our insurance policy. And I know Greg had some good advice in terms of reevaluating that insurance policy on a frequent basis.
Yeah, most of us, are with our collections and with our sites all day, every day. Well, it's like when you're, looking in the mirror at yourself all the time, and then you see somebody you haven't seen for a long time. They say, "Oh, you lost a lot of weight," or worse, "You've gained a lot of weight," and you don't notice it. It's because you're looking in the mirror all the time and you don't see it. So sometimes we're a little too close to our collections, a little too close to our site to realize what we should be telling our insurance company about things that have changed. So I highly recommend taking time, once every 5-6 years, have your insurance agent come on site and go through your, give them a tour of your facility. See if anything jumps out to them where they're like, "Oh, well, that's not in your policy. It really should be." So I highly recommend that.
So I'm going to follow up on Andy's comment to you, Greg, about how you can encourage smaller organizations. Andy, at the very beginning of our discussion, we used some examples about how you can do a light D plan and a more extensive one. And then the question came up about, how can you make people be aware of this until something happens? So I'm going to talk for a couple slides, but what I'm going to encourage all of you to do is to share your disasters, little or big, in the chat. And then Betsy, it would be great if we can capture those. And that might be something that we could use for future trainings to explain some of the disasters that have happened in our region, because I'm sure all of you have had something. I'll just be brief. When I see this collecting information about your facility, I mean, your facility, you need to know where your shutoffs are. You need to have your floor plans. On my birthday, right after we moved and I'd had a baby, we had a pipe burst in the Perkinstone mansion, and the fire department had to break down the door, and I had to bring a baby into the basement and try to sort out all these things. So unfortunately, we didn't have a plan. Quickly, I was able to call some friends so that they could come over and help. But that's why the D plan is nice, is that you can make these plans ahead of time. And you also need to be nosy in your facility. I mean, don't be too shy to go down in that basement and see where things are. Put together floor plans so that you know where all the spaces are, and you can share this with volunteers. You can have this in a booklet for the fire department, maybe near your door, if they would come in and they're unfamiliar. But the other piece of it was, I wanted to share with you, we had a water break in a building beside the large Perkinstone mansion. And later I found out the shutoff to that building was in the basement of the mansion because we were struggling with how to turn the water off there. Write down notes. This D plan allows you to put those notes in, especially if somebody is new and they're coming back, or they're coming to the facility. They don't have that knowledge that someone that's worked there for a long time or volunteered for a long time has. So the D plan allows you to take these details, and it can be overwhelming. So one of the things I suggest is, if you have a curatorial committee for your volunteers or your museum group, maybe every meeting you tackle a section of D plan, and by the end of the year, then you've been through the whole plan. Now, there are a lot of other things that you need to do in order to connect with people. And Greg, you've mentioned some of these, and I see you're not on the screen. So hopefully,
I'm still here.
okay, your connection's all right.
Yeah, my connection said it was wavering, so I killed the video so that I'd make sure I could still talk to everybody. Yeah, so we did talk about a lot of these. I want to more specifically talk about the relationships you have with these organizations. Your police and fire should be coming through your facility at least once a year. Maybe that's your fire marshal, maybe that's your fire chief. Whatever level you think is going to be the most helpful to you, but to make sure that there's a familiarity so that when they come to the building at 4 a.m. and have to bust the door down because there's a burst pipe or there's a fire, they know what's important and what's not, where to point those hoses. Generally they want to soak an entire building, but if they know that they can soak half the building and the other half is not going to get damaged that way, maybe that's more important to them, then they will try and direct that a little bit better. I can't overstress how important it is for a Knox box. They're very expensive, but talk to your city. They may help you with the costs of that. You also might want to just make sure that you can put it into a budget for next year to get a Knox box and have a key to your facility at that they can access, and make sure that they know where it is. They'll help you place it. That way they don't need to knock that door down. You also want to make sure that your service companies are available. So what you're seeing here is a case at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. These cases have been modified since, but almost 19 years ago when I was there, these cases, you can't see my mouse. I'm pointing with my mouse and you all can't see it.
What do you want to point out?
There you go. So you'll see in these cases that there's a big sheet of glass over the front. That glass is being held in by clips on the top and the bottom. The big piece of aluminum pops off, and on the top it swings out, and there's a giant sheet of glass there. What you can't really see, and you may be able to in the next slide of the same case, you see there's a glint of light at the top. Those lights, when they built this case, the idea was that lights explode and you could potentially have a light burst and fall into the case. So how are we going to prevent that from happening? Their decision was put a giant piece of glass on the top. That meant, taking this same glass that they put in the front and putting it on the top. Here's the problem that arose from that. One day there was a cold wind that found its way through the building and hit one of these pieces of glass. All of that glass is tempered by code because you can't have the public standing there, and if a piece of glass breaks, it has to be tempered. Tempered glass, for those that aren't familiar, when you break it, it doesn't break in a nice line and leave a jagged, sharp edge, which is supposed to be more protecting everybody, but it breaks into tiny granules. So it's like sand, not as small as sand, more like rock salt, but it breaks into these small things and the entire thing explodes. The entire thing breaks. So this glass that was being suspended over the lights got hit by the cold. And one thing that tempered glass is not good with is quick temperature changes. So what happens is that a little bit of the glass will expand or contract separate from the rest of the glass. And because of its tempering, that expansion and contraction will shatter the rest of the glass and the entire piece explodes. So tempered glass has a problem with just exploding because of quick temperature changes. So we had this cold wind, the wind made it through, it somehow hit this piece of glass, which it had never hit before, and it exploded. Those panels you see are about 3 feet wide. The glass above is about 3 feet, 4 feet wide. And you can see here how everything is extended off the wall by rods and with backings and everything. And even guitars are hung off the wall with rods to give it a 3-dimensional effect. great looking exhibit, horrible design. The glass panels can only be taken off by professionals that come in and suction cup this thing off and have 3 big dudes lift this thing out of the clips and off to the side. So as the preparator, I couldn't just open up the case. I got a call at 3 a.m. from the security guard who said, "We have a problem. This case, the glass exploded inside this case. We just saw it on our rounds. Do you want to come in?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to come in, but you need to call the glass people and tell them first thing in the morning they need to be there to open the case up." So I came in early. I got there at the earliest the glass people can come in, which even if it's an emergency, you can get them out quicker. But we were the first ones on their list, and that was because we had built a relationship, knowing that this was a problem, that we needed to have them in our back pocket for when this kind of thing happened. So we had them there first thing. I was there first thing. They were able to take the glass off, and I could go in and finally get to the pieces to assess damage and to pull them and get things moving. The saving grace was that we had a guitar, an acoustic guitar that would have taken most of that brunt. We had taken it out a week earlier, so we got really lucky. But that was an instance where my security guard needed to know what was going on and to call me, and then we had to have a good relationship with that company. Companies like ServPro, they're water mitigators. You can do a contract with them where you'll get pushed to the front of the line. I'm going to guess we are up against our time.
Yeah, I actually
so.
have to break in and apologize for not giving you a 10-minute warning, because we have actually come to the end of your time already. And from a quick glance at the PowerPoint, I think we've got a whole bunch more to cover. So let's see what we can do in the next 5 minutes.
All right, so Greg mentioned about trying to freeze their canoe. So we encourage you to make friends in cool places. And Mary, if you want to just quickly describe your relationship here.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was, we were fortunate to have the D plan already in place, because when we had our league, this plan had been created a few years before, but this information was right here and readily available. And this was a really good company. They came right out. It was super helpful to have this information, and our facilities was able to access it too. So I guess the thing I would want to say in summary about the D plan is that it's very easy to fill out. Even if you don't use it, you should take a look at it, because it does all the thinking for you. Like, you don't have to think ahead of time. Like, it does take you through every single step that you should probably be thinking about in terms of anything that could happen as far as a disaster, any issues with staff or concerns, people that need to be in the know. That's what's so nice about this plan, is it takes you through all the steps you need ahead of time. So everything that you think you're worried about forgetting, the D plan really is just a great place to help you just think about what you need.
So we're going to just go through these slides. It's about making sure you have what you need ahead of time. So you can take those small steps and gather information. And while you're doing it, then think about supplies you might need if your roof leaks, or if the basement leaks, or there's a fire. Have those supplies ready. And then Mary, you said from a technology standpoint, there's some important things you need to think about.
Well, I know that since we take up the most room on our library server because of all the digitization, all the image files, all the metadata. So we, even though we're a larger organization, we still ask to have a backup hard drive on our own that our staff can take home from time to time to have, because if we lost that information, we would be over, we'd be done for. I don't know how we would replace it. So it's really good it's very, very important to think about some kind of IT backup strategy for yourself, like Greg said before. So that's what we mean when we talk about an IT plan.
And the other thing you want to think about is sharing the information. So this is a great slide. Something huge happened, and what is it? You want to be the organization that's sharing what happened to your facility and let them know that you are handling it so that people feel comfortable, and they could also help. So use your opportunities to talk with other people. And then Mary, I know you and Greg have both been involved in some intense staff training. So don't forget about the volunteers and other people that are responsible for this plan. Make it inclusive. And you also want to look, what if you have to take things off site? And the historical societies had to do that before. So again, use your board members, your volunteers, ask them for some opportunities of how they can help you. And this D plan alerts you to these things to think about. So Mary, these are some of the things that you said that the D plan makes you think about because it already has pre-made forms.
Yeah, so basically any kind of situation you can think of, whether you're a large or small organization, whether you have a lot of property or if you don't have a lot of property, it provides every single kind of form, you know, from every disaster you can think of. These are just a few examples, but it does include things like bomb threats and, you know, other things that, you know, are just, you know, possibilities if you need to think about them too.
And so when you fill out the plan, it's going to allow you to do those things that you need to. And so Mary, do you want to just walk us quickly
I
through the
think
next
actually
couple slides?
we may need to take a moment. We may need to go ahead and maybe we plan for next year steps to take in case of disaster.
There you
Okay,
go.
that sounds good. So,
I mean, there's a whole bunch of great stuff in the rest of the PowerPoint that I'm sad we can't share, but yeah.
If I can leave everybody with one more thought, look outside today. When we're done here, you're going to take a break. Look outside, see the beautiful sunshine, how lovely it is outside, how great everything is. And this is when you think about disasters. This is when you need to think about disaster planning. So you need to go through your thought process now. When things are good, that's when you disaster plan. Because when things are bad, that's when you are scrambling. So don't scramble then. Get it together now so that you have a good footing when something does happen.
well, and I actually see somebody put in the chat, we did have a slide about keeping your plan updated. That includes staff, volunteers, board members. You do want to keep your plan up to date. So.
All right.
Well, we know there are probably some questions. So if there are any questions, then feel free to ask them, and we'll be happy to share more information in the future.
And I apologize for my long-winded stories. I'm sure that's why we're running long. We'll share this PowerPoint with you as well. There's a lot of good links in there for more education. FEMA does some readiness, AAM, AASLH, IMLS all does disaster planning. So there are resources available for you.
All right. Thank you again to all of our presenters. Go ahead and put questions in the chat, and if they can they'll stick around a little while and answer those while we. I'm going to declare it a 7-minute break. Stop recording.